have a camera on my desktop computer, so I can see you and some other good gents. That's awesome. I am on my phone though, waving back.
Super, that's great.
Yeah,
happy to have you on. Yeah, thank you for joining, John.
Yeah, thanks for the call again yesterday. It's very helpful.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. Okay, we're at the top of the hour here. I believe we'll have some additional people dialing in the next few minutes, but I'll just give a few moments of a background before I introduce everybody and we start the webinar this afternoon. So allow me to introduce myself. I'm Ingrid Jarrett, President and CEO of the BC Hotel Association. Really pleased that you've chosen to take your time this afternoon to join us with Sam Thomas, Dylan Tomlin, and Vlad Kloska. And, you know, our goal with BCHA is, as we're building out this sustainability pillar, is to make sure that you as hotels have an opportunity to take advantage of the partnerships we're developing in the energy field to make sure that you're able to mitigate those energy costs whenever possible. And one of our recovery strategies and our understanding of the industry is the middle of that statement is critical, that you're able not only to come out of this dreadful circumstance we find ourselves in with a greater flow to your bottom line, but also a greater opportunity for sustainability. And so our GoGreen program, some of you would have been on that historically with Dylan 2 weeks ago, I think it was. A very successful webinar. If you weren't on that webinar, it is available with the soundtrack on our website, bcha.com. And this is an addition to that. And our goal is that as we find the right partners and we can recognize opportunities for you, that we will continue to present to you, not only sharing the relationships that we're developing, but the opportunities to learn about energy conservation, and potentially our goal is that that helps you survive this pandemic and that you come out on the other side operating more efficiently. So let me just say that there is a chat function on the top right of your screen, at least that's where it is on my screen. Please feel free to use that. We will be going through a series of slides, and then the last, probably Sam, I'm thinking 20 minutes or so, give or take, we will have a Q&A session. So as you have your questions, or if you have any questions, please jot them down and then feel free to pop them down in that chat function. And between the four of us, we will manage that chat and do our best to answer your questions. If we're not able to get to all of your questions, which has occurred with some of our webinars, we will actually respond to you after the fact, as long as we know that you've registered, which we do have your registration information. So on behalf of BCHA, again, thank you very much for joining. I would like now to introduce Vlad with Fortis BC. He is our partner with Fortis. And, you know, when we look at what we can do from a partnership perspective for our industry, He's been an amazing partner for us, really bringing the expertise that Fortis has and their commitment to sustainability and ensuring that there is energy savings. And through that, we've been able to develop our GoGreen program and hire Dylan Tomlin, who is also here on the line. And Dylan is our energy analyst, and he will work with all of you directly on different program opportunities that we have. He has joined our team in June and is now vetting all of your emails of interest to participate. So Dylan will be your one-on-one, and we're here to support you however we can. Vlad, may I now pass it over to you to say hello from Fortis and to introduce Sam?
Thank you, Ingrid. Indeed, the relationship, I believe, is tremendous, and so far it's extremely successful, and I'm looking forward to enhance our relationship in the future and extend this beautiful kind of reach out to all the hotels. Dylan, as a journalist, please, everyone from the hotels or any of the participants of the industry, reach out to him. He really is your one point now to let you know what and how we can work together. Fortis has, let's just go for it. Fortis has incentives. If you do any efficiency or most of the energy efficiency programs, we do have incentives. Please do not hesitate. Reach out, ask about it. It definitely makes a difference, and we are here to really help. So that's about the Fortis and what we are here for, really, is to help you out with any of the energy tasks you are handling. And I'm really pleased to introduce Sam. I'm still shocked that he moved from New Zealand all the way to Nelson. New Zealand's such a great country. Why would he want? But I'm pleased that he moved because he is tremendous, absolutely tremendous in what he does, and his knowledge is just amazing. So without further ado, Sam, take it over and please show us what we can do to be ready to open or maintain the system best we can.
Well, thank you, Vlad. That's quite the hype there to kick me off. So thank you. I also do, just before I get into it, I want to thank Fortis, who have sponsored my time to put this webinar together and to deliver it to you. So Fortis are putting this webinar on. So big thank you to Fortis for that continued support. So thanks everyone for joining. We have a few people coming in still. Perhaps if you could mute yourself for now. I hear a little bit of feedback in the background there. Definitely we're going to have some time at the end for Q&A. I want to try to keep us on track with time, but I am happy to stay on afterwards as well for those that want to stick around afterwards and ask further questions. Just going to mute this person myself. There we go. That might work. So without further ado, let's get into it. We are some background noise there. Ingrid, I'm going to mute you if you don't mind. I'm not sure who that is. But
everyone would be the best.
Yeah. There we go. Okay. So we're going to speak today about how we can optimize our buildings for energy efficiency, both during, at the moment, and after the pandemic that we're currently in. And so I will mention as well, the webinar is being recorded, as Ingrid mentioned. So by all means, there's no need to take screenshots. You'll be able to see the slides afterwards. Very quickly, Prism Engineering, we're an energy management engineering company. Specialize in mechanical and electrical engineering, but everything we do revolves around trying to make existing facilities and buildings more efficient. We've done a fair amount of work on the hotels and other industries as well. So just very briefly there. Myself, I don't want to dwell too much on, but I've been involved in the energy management industry for about 15 years now, originally from New Zealand. Slowly losing the accent, but I'm going to share some of the knowledge of what we do and how you guys can apply it to your own industry and own facilities. So we're going to go through, here's our agenda for the day. We've got three main topics. The first one that we're going to speak to here is really what are some of the best practices at the moment as they relate to HVAC being heating, ventilation, air conditioning, as we begin to reopen after, maybe after is the wrong word, but as COVID-19 continues. So we're then going to get into how we prepare for a second wave, what some of the best practices are around that, and then opportunities for how we can make the most of the current situation, how we can make lemonade and try to incorporate energy efficiency and sustainability measures into a lot of our buildings, which are currently being impacted by what's going on at the moment. So we're going to get into it here. Some of the themes that I really want to try to drive across here are that, we are talking about energy efficiency, but ultimately, first and foremost, we need to be operating our buildings safely. And that's, more true now than ever before. And so we're going to speak a lot in this webinar about how the HVAC, how our mechanical and electrical systems relate to safety in our buildings, and how that ties into energy efficiency as well. So it's incredibly relevant right now. It's something that, this pandemic's kind of caught everybody off guard, and we've all been scrambling to some extent in terms of, what we should be doing in our buildings, how we should be operating, what those best practices are. And so now as we sort of start to, gather more information and figure out how best to tackle this beast, we have a lot more best practices that we can share here in terms of what you could incorporate into your own facilities. So that's what I want to try to get across today. As we go, I mentioned before as well, feel free to ask questions in the chat box. We'll have time at the end, but if we're able to, I'll pause as we go as well. So first section here, in terms of operating our facilities at the moment and what some of the best practices are, particularly in relation to HVAC. So a little bit of conceptual subject first here. And so the verdict is still out really as to quite how COVID-19 is transmitted in airstreams. And because of that, we really need to err on the side of caution. And so the research that's currently being done at the moment is trying to determine whether or not COVID-19 is being spread as a smaller infectious aerosol or a larger emitted droplet. And there's been a lot of media published recently saying that we need to be more diligent with our HVAC systems and our air conditioning systems because COVID-19 is transmitted through all our airstreams. Well, the verdict really still is out on that. At the moment, most of the evidence points towards it being more of a large droplet, which is transmitted at short range. And because of that, we're really focusing heavily at the moment on social distancing and sanitization of surfaces because the droplets don't typically become suspended in the air for all that long. And so there hasn't been a lot of focus to date on preventative measures around what we can do with our air distribution systems and ventilation in our buildings. But that's what I want to try to bring across today, is to introduce this subject and give you guys something that you're able to take back to your own facilities. I'm not going to dwell on this slide here, other than really to say that a lot of the guidance that the industry and the engineering world gets on COVID-19 at the moment is coming from an organization called ASHRAE. ASHRAE is the American Society of Heating and Refrigeration Air Conditioning Engineers. A lot of our building codes that we rely on here that apply to your facilities are based on guidance documents from ASHRAE. So this is really the originating point for a lot of the recommendations at the moment. So really what ASHRAE is saying is it's likely that COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 can be transmitted through the air. Because of that, let's err on the side of caution and apply best practices to our ventilation, our filtration systems that might be able to reduce the airborne concentration of the virus. That said, even if you went to the nth degree with your mechanical systems and your ventilation and flushing hotel rooms and so on, you still can't completely prevent an infectious aerosol. And so really, if we actually look at a hierarchy of control measures for COVID-19 and trying to make our hotels and Airbnbs and so on safer for our guests, the mechanical systems is somewhat at the bottom of that hierarchy. Really, the first thing we should be doing is still focusing on the social distancing, focusing on the sterilization of surfaces. And then sort of finally, these more mechanical HVAC type provisions are definitely recognized as helping, but sort of further down that list. So, ultimately, I think for this particular industry, the more that can be done to demonstrate to guests that you're taking every preventative measure possible to make their stay as safe as possible is really going to help, bolster that confidence in the public at the moment to come in and stay. And so these mechanical measures that we're going to talk about today are definitely part of that, those best practices that you can demonstrate to guests. So some of the approaches that are definitely have shown to be effective at reducing the spread of infectious aerosols: ventilation, filtration, we're going to talk about both of these. Temperature, humidity a bit as well. Sterilization, we're not going to touch on that. It's really more sort of starting to get a little bit more healthcare specific and quite energy intensive to do that as well. So these are some of the best practices that we're going to speak to as we go here. So ventilation, the old saying that the solution to pollution is dilution. Well, maybe we don't want to speak about that sort of environmentally, but the same concept does apply with infectious aerosols in our airstream. So really anything that we can do to dilute the air in our facilities is going to help. And so ventilation, i.e. bringing in fresh air or outside air, that's what we're talking about with ventilation, is going to help. And so in general, and based on ASHRAE guidance and best practices in the industry at the moment, really more ventilation is considered better. There's really no bounds around what that term more means. It's going to vary dependent on the types of facilities we have, the season that we're in. Obviously, if we're in the middle of winter, we can't open all our windows and flush our systems with 100% outdoor air because it's going to cost us an absolute fortune and our guests are going to freeze. So, in some ways, the good news now is that as we're starting to reopen, we're getting into summer, it does make it much easier to open windows, to flush our systems a little bit more, to bring in more outside air because we're not going to freeze our buildings. So certainly over the summer, I'd encourage these best practices here. Bring in more fresh air. We're going to talk about some ways to do that shortly. Use operable windows. Sounds very basic, but there's a huge advantage to using windows. And a lot of our hotels don't have particularly advanced ventilation systems. Quite often we have a little PTAC on the wall and an exhaust fan in our washroom and some windows that open. So let's use what we've got, and that's fine. We're not saying that you got to go install the Cadillac systems in all our buildings and do that. We're really saying work with what you have, apply these concepts where it makes sense for you. So the more ventilation, the better. Making sure that, if we do have mechanical ventilation systems, that those dampers and economizer, that those seals are well sealed and tacked, that we're not getting bypassed air or leaking air in those facilities, in those systems. As we start to reopen, there's a lot of emphasis around flushing our buildings. And so if we had a larger hotel facility that maybe we had some conference rooms, or we had a dining area that we are about to reopen, we'd want to consider flushing that. So opening windows, providing mechanical ventilation before occupancy to really try to push air through that space. Again, if we have windows, let's use them. If we have a parkade, making sure that if we're able to turn on or override that exhaust fan that we might have in there. Quite often parkades, the exhaust fans in parkades are controlled based on carbon monoxide sensors. So if we have a lot of vehicle exhaust, the fans will come on, otherwise they're off. So we might want to look at overriding those systems to allow for a bit of pre-purge of those spaces before we reopen them. Now, obviously, a lot of this comes with an energy penalty. We're talking about running fans longer or bringing in more outside air. And so that's the trade-off. We're going to talk more about how we can really try to rein that in shortly. So there's a bit of a balancing act here between applying these best practices and not getting too carried away with an energy penalty. A couple of schematics here. I don't want to get too technical on it, but on the left-hand side, we see a typical air handling unit. So in some of our larger hotels, we might have air handling units for our hotel lobby, perhaps, or for we may even have a makeup air unit for our central corridors. So these larger systems will have outside air or ventilation, fresh air dampers. And these dampers here vary the amount of outside air or ventilation air that comes into the space. And quite often these dampers will have a minimum position, might be 20%, might be 30%, so that we're always providing the base amount of ventilation that we need in our space to meet code. So what we're saying there is, you know, where possible, let's think about ways that we might be able to increase that minimum damper position. Maybe we can't take it right to 100% open, but maybe we could increase it to 50%, you know, if our temperature conditions permit. So there's certainly ways that we can increase the ventilation to provide greater air change in our spaces. With larger systems, it becomes a little easier. Here on the right, we have a furnace, typical furnace here, where we have our return air coming back from the space, heading off to our floors through the furnace. Not all furnaces do, but many will have an outside air duct that you see here in this little blue shaded box. And quite often they'll be either uncontrolled, i.e. no damper there. You see a little damper, motorized damper in this particular one. But if we have this outside air duct, we want to make sure that we are bringing in a minimum amount of outside air there if possible. If that damper is closed, let's make sure it's open. If we don't have these outside air ducts, it might be quite a simple retrofit to add one in. And that way we are providing some ventilation, some fresh air mixing with our return air. Because if we don't have that, really we have no way of providing mechanical ventilation to the spaces that that furnace is serving. So for smaller facilities with furnaces, I'd encourage you to go and take a look, see if there is a component of outside air being brought into that furnace that might be able to help. So we talked about mechanical ventilation, and then of course passive ventilation, windows. And I can't underestimate the power of windows. We have them in nearly all our guest rooms and hotel rooms, so use them where it really makes sense. And particularly between guest stays, as soon as your cleaning staff come through, encourage them to open windows and perhaps even leave them open until the next guest arrives. It could even be something that you could publicize to guests as they arrive, as, you know, we've left your windows open as a best practice to provide ventilation in light of COVID-19. So when you get into your room, feel free to close them if you wish. The other piece, back to mechanical here, but the other piece is our exhaust fans that we have in our quite often in our washrooms. And these washrooms are sorry, a lot of literature at the moment points towards washrooms and toilets as being a potential source and a risk of generating airborne droplets of COVID-19. And so in public washrooms, if you have washrooms in your hotel lobby, actually even encouraging or leaving signs up to encourage people to close toilet lids if you have them in between use can even help, has been proven to help actually during the SARS outbreak some time ago. It was proven to help reduce the spread there. However, that said, washroom exhaust fans are quite important, and we want to make sure that they're in use and that they can operate, if possible, continuously. Sometimes these washroom exhaust fans might be tied into a light switch, or there might be a manual switch on the wall. If you're able to override that, or even leave that switch on with a little note on it saying that, please leave the exhaust fan on if possible. We're trying to create increased ventilation at the moment, then I'd encourage you to do that. The other thing as well, of course, we've all seen exhaust fans like this that get quite gummed up and blocked up with lint and all sorts of other things. So make sure that your exhaust fans are well maintained, that there's no restrictions to the flow, because you want to try to achieve the most exhaust flow that you can, especially if your windows are open, because then you are drawing air through the room and out the exhaust fan. Same concept applies to any elevator exhaust fans that you might have as well. I'm an engineer and I like graphs, but I'm not going to get too complex on this here. Really what I want to try to drive across is this concept of air exchange here. And so really what we're saying is that the more changes of air we have in our room each hour, and so I'll take a step back. One air change represents if we can remove and replace the entire volume of air in our space in a 1 hour period, then that's one air change per hour. And so the more air changes per hour you're able to achieve, the reduced the time is that it takes to remove, in this case, 99% of airborne contaminants from the space, which makes sense. The minimum code requirements for most hotel rooms and guest rooms is around 1 air change per hour, which is very low. And so we're way down the bottom of this graph here. And so really, we're talking about, 2.5, 3 hours perhaps before we've really achieved a good turnover of air in our space. And so that's fine. I'm not saying that we need to necessarily go and upsize all our mechanical systems, but anything that can be done, sort of back to the concept before, opening windows, operating exhaust fans continuously, maybe increasing our damper positions on our larger systems, is all going to help. And that's going to start to drive us from this end of the graph over here, further over here, where we're going to have a greater chance of removing those airborne contaminants from the space, if we have them. So we spoke about ventilation, i.e. fresh air, outside air. We also want to talk about filtration. Filtration is obviously a very effective way at removing particles from our airstream. If we have the right filtration, we can also remove infectious aerosols from our airstream. It's not necessarily a silver bullet, but it certainly does help. Filtration in hotels is not necessarily something that we pay a lot of attention to. In our larger systems, our big air handling units, make-up air units, we will have slightly more advanced filters, but we might still only be operating them or using fairly basic filters that might be around. We have this MERV rating of maybe 5 to 8, the sort of typical filters that we might be replacing. So this is the minimum efficiency reporting value of our filters. So don't get too caught up in the terminology or everything that you see on this slide, but the point I want to bring across here is that anything we can do to increase the MERV rating of our filters, if we can go from a 5 to a 12 or a 13, then we're obviously going to increase the ability of that filter to capture those airborne particles. ASHRAE is currently recommending nothing less than MERV 13 if we really want to have a big impact on capturing those airborne viruses. But really, anything we can do to increase the MERV rating, even if we can go from MERV 5 to MERV 8, that's still going to help. The other thing that's really going to help too, if we do have larger systems with these filters in, really make sure that our filters are well sealed. Often we'll go into a system and we'll see big gaps around the filters, or we'll see a filter that was put in, it's actually the wrong size. You've got a 2-inch gap on the side of the filter. Well, air is going to take the path of least resistance. It's going to go around the filter, and your filter is therefore virtually ineffective. So maintenance with our HVAC systems is really going to help us out at this point as well. The other thing is that if we do have larger fan systems and we're going and installing higher MERV rated filters, we're going to incur more of a pressure drop in those systems. There's more resistance with the thicker filters. So we want to make sure that those systems can handle it. Maybe we want to speak to a mechanical contractor or engineer to make sure that's going to happen. I'm going to talk about PTAC units in our hotel rooms shortly. The other thing, just as a best practice here, more as health and safety, is around disposal of filters, and something that might not be considered or thought about too much there. But if we are taking filters out of our HVAC systems now, one of the best practices there is to actually, before that filter is removed, is to actually spray it with a fixing agent. And so even something like hairspray can actually work to do that. And what that does is it basically just locks any particulate matter or contaminants onto the filter surface, so that whoever is removing it is then safer while doing it. Obviously wearing masks and gloves while they do that as well. So we all know what these are. Probably hundreds of thousands of them in hotel rooms across BC, are PTAC units here. And so, a lot of the HVAC that we have in our hotels is provided by these units. They do have filters built into them. They are very basic filters, typically. Some of them will have a higher MERV rated filter, but for the most part, they're fairly basic. That said, every little bit helps. And so now is a really great time to be thinking about maintaining these systems, cleaning the filters on these PTAC units that you have. It's not only going to help you with filtration of potential airborne viruses, but also it's going to help the units run more efficiently. So I encourage you to think about what it is that you could do with the units that you have. Think about these filters. Maybe even speak to a mechanical contractor. You might be able to increase the MERV rating of the filters that you have in here. The other option here, other best practice is actually around operating these systems, the fans on these PTAC units continuously. Sometimes they'll have a mode, a function where you can choose whether the fan runs continuously or whether it's on auto. Quite often it will say fan on or fan auto. And if you set it to fan on, that fan will run all the time, regardless of the need for heating or cooling. The heating and cooling will still cycle on and off as required. But by doing that, you're just providing that little edge, a little bit more filtration in your room than you would otherwise be doing. So in terms of temperature, there's temperature can be used as a way to limit the survival rate of airborne viruses, but really everything in terms of literature points towards it needing to be more than 30 degrees to do that. And so 30 degrees in our hotel rooms and our spaces is really impractical, obviously very energy intensive. So by no means are we encouraging you to do that. So, really, if you're getting asked questions, or you might see something in the news about turning the heat up to try to kill viruses, I'd really say, hey, it's not a practical solution for the facilities that we're talking about here. So just to kind of clarify that myth a little bit. Heating and cooling best practices, though, we're not saying heat to 30. We're saying, maintain those standard occupied temperature set points, whatever they may be. Only try to heat or cool as we get into some of the zones that are occupied. And if we do have PTAC units that we saw before, consider occupancy sensors. I'm sure Dylan has recommended this in places before, where we want to try to limit the amount that our PTAC units are operating when guests are not in our suites. And this is, more an opportunity now than ever before, where we definitely have a higher vacancy rate. And so the energy savings opportunity will obviously increase with these occupancy-based controllers, the more that our suites and rooms are unoccupied. So briefly, a little piece on plumbing here too. Water stagnation is something that we really want to make sure that we are on top of with facilities that are partially occupied or maybe seeing longer periods between guest occupancies. And so we want to make sure that we are ultimately flushing systems if they haven't been used in quite some time. We want to try to limit the likelihood or the possibility that Legionnaires is going to increase or develop in our plumbing systems. There's a lot of great references on there out on that at the moment, but in terms of some best practices, if we haven't used a space in some time, in a week, then I'd encourage you to flush hot and cold sinks, drinking fountains, lavatories, urinals, flush the toilet, whatever it might be, just to get some water flowing through it. P-traps, it's this photo that you see at the top here, these P-traps under our sink, can be, or have proven to be in the past, quite an issue I mentioned before in washrooms for fostering contaminants. And so we want to make sure that as we turn our tap on, we're obviously flushing water through it. We want to make sure that they're wet, i.e. they actually have some water in the bottom of them. And if we have a hotel room that may have been unoccupied for weeks on end or months on end, then the P-traps can dry out, the water evaporates, and then we have possible issues with backflow and airborne issues with what might be backed up in the plumbing system. So make sure that you're flushing plumbing systems if spaces haven't been occupied in quite some time. Domestic hot water, if we can keep the temperature above 50 degrees, at least in between 50 to 60 degrees in our hot water systems, again, to try to limit the risk of Legionnaires. If we're shutting the systems down completely, then ideally we drain them, or perhaps treat the water as well. If we have a larger hotel, we might have a domestic hot water circulation system. So even if that building is unoccupied, we probably want to keep that circulating at least once every couple of weeks for a few hours hot, so that we can kill anything that may have developed in those domestic hot water systems. So flush and heat, making sure that we're keeping systems wet and keeping systems flushed is ultimately what we want to try to do there with our plumbing systems. In terms of preparing for a second wave, just a few ideas I want to bring across for this. And it's a tricky subject. It's unknown times at the moment. We're somewhat coming out of the first wave. There's a lot of talk about the second wave. Ultimately, we want to make sure that we're as best prepared as we can be for what might come in the future, and so that we're not sort of scrambling as we've had to have done in the first time this came across to us. So really, it's all about planning, plan, and many of you will have been considering already what a pandemic response plan might look like for you, probably more around health and safety, standard operating procedures for some of your cleaning staff, for your front of house staff, for guest spacing and so on. There's obviously a lot to consider as part of that, and I know that the BCHA have put out some really great and very thorough, very detailed material on all those considerations around best practices that could be brought into a response plan for you. That said, HVAC often kind of gets left behind with these plans. So I'd encourage you to think about what it is you can do with those plans, whether it be even briefly documented is better than nothing at all. To think about some what it is in terms of operating procedures that could be applied if we are suddenly forced to enter another shutdown period. So what it is that you might be able to do to override ventilation systems. If we have a more advanced control system, we can think about what we might be able to do to boost ventilation, have that all ready to go. Filtration, what it is that we need to do when replacing filters. Purchase spare filter stock. As we know, supply of a lot of product has been challenging in the last number of months, and so if we want to have those high MERV rated filters, we would need to make sure we have some spares as well, so that we can get through what might happen in the future. And ultimately as well, I think probably the most important piece here is really to really figure out where you currently stand. Develop a good understanding of your current situation as it relates to ventilation and filtration and control systems and what you're doing with these exhaust fans that you have in your buildings. It might be that you need to do some review. Maybe you need to engage a contractor or consultant even to have a look, see what those existing ventilation levels are. You know, are you even meeting minimum code? And if not, well, let's think about what it is that you might need to do to enhance that, to improve that. And you know, often a really good place to start here, and we're going to speak about it shortly, is actually doing an energy assessment and talk about studies, but an energy assessment is a study, and part of at least a more comprehensive energy assessment will be to look at your ventilation systems and, you know, to go back to manufacturing data and balancing reports to see what it is that you're currently providing or currently getting. So really good place to start is an energy study, especially because there's they're free if Dylan does them, and there's a lot of funding through other programs as well. So good way to start at the moment. But like I say, if we don't have a good understanding of our current situation, it's very difficult to say what it is we might need to do to enhance it for the future. If we have built-in control systems, you know, I know a lot of us with smaller hotels and bed and breakfasts and so on might not have anything advanced here. Maybe we just have some programmable thermostats, but you know, larger facilities may have a more advanced control system. If we have remote access so that we can actually look at these systems from home and see what our ventilation systems are doing, well, that's great. Really good tool, good technology to be able to use to monitor systems at the moment. And we'll talk more a little bit about that shortly. Again, control systems, if planning for the future, if we have the ability to do so, you know, let's get some strategies in place where at the click of a button, we can hit, maybe we call it pandemic mode or whatever it might be, second wave mode, but we have a feature built into those control systems that increases our damper position, that allows our exhaust fans to run continuously rather than based on a schedule or whatever it might be, just so that we are easily set up for what might happen in the future. So I know there's a few questions coming up in the chat box here, and I'm seeing those as they come. So thank you for that. And what I'll do, we're kind of just about to start our third section here, so I'll get through that, and then we'll get into Q&A at the end if that works for people. So the third piece I want to touch on here is really, you know, now that we have an understanding of some of the best practices around, you know, what it is we can do with ventilation, with filtration, with opening our windows, and so on, and how we could plan for the future. You know, what is it? How do we try to turn this into an opportunity? And anything that we can do right now to reduce cost is obviously going to help us. And energy savings is really a great place to be thinking at the moment. There's a lot of opportunity in empty buildings, and we want to make sure that we're utilizing and taking advantage of these opportunities. So a really good place to start, we call it energy audits, we might call it energy assessments or opportunity assessments, lots of different terminology for it, but you know, ultimately we're reviewing our current systems, we're seeing what might we be able to do to reduce where we're wasting energy, to increase the efficiency of our systems, and how we can ultimately reduce cost in our facilities. Different levels of energy audits, very basic, sort of an opportunity scan, something that we might even do from sort of from our desk. If we had for example, if we had a portfolio of hotels, we might look at the energy consumption for each hotel and divide that by the floor area for each hotel. And then we could maybe look to see which hotels it is that have the worst energy performance. And maybe we'd use that as part of that opportunity scan to say, right, let's focus on our worst 3 hotels perhaps, and let's do a more detailed or thorough audit as part of this process. So ASHRAE, again, I keep referring to ASHRAE, but they do dictate a couple of different levels of energy audits there, sort of walk through a bit more basic. Detailed, we see a lot of the level 2. Level 3 is pretty uncommon, really. Much more advanced sort of modeling as part of that. I don't want to get sort of too caught up into this slide here because we are getting short on time, but I want to drive home just one point here. And really, this is kind of the steps that we go through if we're conducting an energy assessment or audit, or that Dylan will conduct if he's looking at your facility too. It's part of the GoGreen program. And really the box in red here is what I want to focus on. And really what we're saying is the order in which we consider these last 3 steps in the energy audit process is actually quite important. And quite often we say, I want to save energy, so therefore I'm going to put solar panels on the roof, or I'm going to change all my lighting to LED. And those things are great and they will help, but there's only any point jumping to those if we've done everything else first. And really this piece, this number 5, eliminate waste, is what we really want to focus on. And what we're saying there is, like, let's just not waste energy. Let's figure out what we actually need. Let's compare that to what we're actually doing, and let's try to close that gap. So there's no point putting solar panels on the roof if we've got, you know, really inefficient lighting systems, and our lights operate all the time and they're completely uncontrolled, and we've got pumps running all over the place. We don't want to jump and put on a ton of solar panels when we haven't first sort of backed it up and said, what can we do to tighten our belt? The other thing with tightening our belt is it's the cheapest way to save energy. You know, maximizing efficiency, that's putting in those LED lights. But if there's spaces that we don't need lights, or if there's spaces that lights are left on all the time, well, let's just get them off. Let's get them out of there. Let's eliminate the waste first. So I just want to drive that home. I know it sounds like common sense, but it's often forgotten with energy projects, especially now where we don't have a lot of money to play with in terms of doing projects in our facilities. So there's a lot that can be done in that step 5 to really tighten our belt, eliminate that waste before we jump to spending money. So I want to plug here, I've mentioned before, and I know many of you will have been on the webinar previously, but Dylan, who's on the call right here as well, is your GoGreen energy advisor, and he is available to you to conduct energy assessments. This is a really great place to start. And I've put some links up there. I know Dylan would be really excited to hear from any of you that haven't been in touch with Dylan before, just to find out a bit more about what he can do for you and how he can ultimately help reduce energy cost and potentially, you know, identify projects that can also address ventilation and filtration as well, and how he can help you. So I really do encourage you to do it. You know, Dylan's sponsored, supported there by Fortis as well, so another plug to Fortis. Really great program, kind of unique. Not many other industries have a resource like Dylan there, so I encourage you to make the most of it. There are other programs out there as well. Recommissioning, I know we don't, it might be sort of a new subject to some of you. Recommissioning really is it's kind of a little bit like an energy audit, but it's really focusing more on tuning your building up. And so not necessarily looking at what you might do to replace all your lighting or upgrade your heating plant, but what it is that you can do to tune your building. And there is a Fortis BC and Hydro combined program at the moment for that, where there's some good funding as well. If anyone's interested in finding out more about that, I know Vlad would be happy to speak about it. I would as well. I put my email on the last slide, so if anyone is interested. The facilities do need to be greater than 50,000 square feet to be eligible. So, you know, larger hotels, but good opportunity. Really, we're looking at things like how can we adjust schedules, how can we calibrate sensors, make sure everything's working as it should, make sure our ventilation systems are providing what they're supposed to. Maybe we'd incorporate air balancing into that recommissioning, tuning our systems up to make sure they're operating as efficiently as they can. Air balancing in larger facilities is a really good thing to be doing when buildings are sparsely occupied, making sure that we are providing the right amount of air to different spaces. There's also obviously a big health and safety component to that as well. So good to do when spaces are unoccupied or sparsely occupied. Really helps with ensuring that we're achieving adequate flows at the moment too. Plug loads, again, common sense here. So this is really just a reminder, but there's so much that we see in facilities that we go into where, especially at the moment where buildings are very sparsely occupied, that plug loads are still on. You know, we might have, and I'm thinking of hotel rooms here where we have, you know, mini fridges and we have TVs and we have, you know, in-floor heating in our bathrooms perhaps as well. Maybe not plug loads, but we want to make sure that all this equipment is off if it doesn't need to be. It really does add up, especially when we're talking as many rooms as we are in hotels. You know, vending machines on floors as well. Ice machines, perhaps we don't need all of them on in our hotel. Maybe we could get away with a few less. All these things will contribute to making a difference too. Lighting, again, common sense. We really want to make sure lights are off when they don't need to be. If we have, you know, some of our larger buildings, we might have a lighting sweep that happens in our common areas, making sure that lights are not on if they don't need to be. Particularly for, you know, the hotels that may have a, you know, conference facility or function rooms associated with them as well. So I want to start wrapping up with that. I know we've kind of breezed through quite a bit of content there in a short amount of time and introduced a number of different subjects, but there's a lot of information out there. I have listed a few different resources that we've drawn upon as we've gone through the webinar. ASHRAE, for those that want a little bit more technical guidance around some ventilation requirements there's a lot there. The language that it's written in is actually quite easy to digest and understand, so don't be put off by it. BOMA have some really good information, Fortis have some good information, and of course, I don't show it here, it's implied, but BCHA have a really good COVID resource page on their website as well, that I'm sure a number of you will have looked at and reviewed already, including some quite recent best practice guidelines that they've included there, and recordings of previous webinars too. So I really encourage you to, you know, continue reading, continue educating yourselves on what's happening, and scrutinize a little bit what you're reading and see in the news. There's been a lot of media attention recently around, you know, airborne viruses and how COVID relates to that. We need to close all our systems and everything. So, you know, read what you do with a grain of salt. Refer to, you know, this technical guidance here to really help guide you through this. And again, I really think that you know, there's a great opportunity with our HVAC and mechanical and lighting systems to not only to reduce energy consumption at the moment, but really to, you know, utilize and apply these best practices to really help drive home consumer confidence that you guys are doing everything you can to make guest stays as safe as possible, and to try to publicize that, really make it known that that's happening in the industry. So with that, I'm going to pause. I'm going to open up for Q&A. I know we've got a few questions there. I'm going to leave this slide here at the end as well, as a plug at the moment to Fortis and the BCHA for putting this on. My email address is there. I'm more than happy if people have questions afterwards to get in touch. I'm happy to answer them offline as well. But with that, I'm going to start going through the chat box here, and there's a couple of questions here that I'll answer. So if anyone else has more questions, feel free to put them in the chat box or unmute yourself, and we can go through them on the phone too. So a question here from John Clisby. Thanks, John. Does opening windows and doors remove more air than HVAC units? And if so, can a room's air be removed to a safer level faster than HVAC, and therefore we clean a room after 1 hour safely? Yeah, it's a really good question, John, and the technical answer to that is it depends. And you know, really, it depends on whether it's windy outside, whether you know, how much you can open the window by, and so on. Really, you know, everything you can do to increase that air change that we spoke about, in other words, air flowing through a hotel room, is going to help. And so opening windows and doors is definitely going to help. In many hotel rooms, it's probably going to help more, like have a larger impact than that little exhaust fan that you might have in your hotel washroom. Those are often, from my experience, very minimal in terms of what they can remove, and are often not well maintained. So I really encourage you to look at those systems, make sure they're operating as they should be. Yeah, keep windows and doors open in between guests. You know, whether that relates to, you know, being able to clean after 1 hour safely, I really can't say. But you know, I know Ingrid just mentioned this morning that original 3-hour guidance there in between room cleanings has since been removed. So yeah, the more that can be done to increase that flow, dilute spaces between guests, it's all going to help. Yeah. So it's an unclear answer to a clear question, so I apologize, but hopefully that helps, John.
Thank you, Sam. Let me just add that the updated link is to the best practices from the BC CDC. It actually has just gone out in a communique from the BC Hotel Association. It also rests on our website, which is bcha.com. And I'm just thinking, Dylan, can I ask you to unmute yourself and maybe just add a little bit of support in for Sam's presentation, and also making sure that those people that are in attendance have an understanding about the GoGreen and the partnership there of what the opportunity is.
Yeah.
Certainly. Thanks, Ingrid, and thanks, Sam, for a great presentation. So the GoGreen opportunity that is presented to BCHA members is definitely starts off with an energy assessment where we will identify the top energy users within your facility, kind of do a short list on where the best approach is to get those quick wins on conservation, whether it's lighting or whether it's adding additives to your boiler system. There's multiple options available for reducing your energy consumption on site. And then we'll benchmark your property against other hotels, whether either in your portfolio or across BC, so you can see how you compare against similar hotels. Help you with board presentations. If you're looking to have to go pitch your project to ownership, we'll help you with those. Basically help develop your plan, identify where the energy is being used, benchmark your property, and give you a good snapshot on what that looks like. So Sam's put the contact information back up on the screen there. So please do reach out to me, and we can schedule a meeting to either go through the program in more detail or to dive right into that assessment.
And the beauty of both of these gentlemen and all their expertise, for those of you out there in the hotel world, is that this is provided through our relationship with BCHA and Fortis BC, with Prism as an additional partner, and Dylan, again, as I said in the beginning, is on our team. So that is all complementary. And then there's also expertise to assist you when you're looking at your operation and you're trying to figure out what to do first or what to do second, or what is the ROI over time. There are some very good vehicles by which to be able to develop a strategy for energy savings, either when you're operating at a minimal capacity, which many of you currently are, or even when you're ramping up summer and winter and different times like that. So I encourage you to reach out to Dylan and make sure that he understands and he can dial in like magic to your hotel and then be able to give you some short and potentially long-term recommendations as well. Sam, back to you. I'm not sure if you see any other questions or whether or not you'd like to add anything else. I'm seeing we're nearing the top of the hour.
We are. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat box, but we certainly have a few more minutes if anyone else on the call has anything to ask, or even if they wish to share one of their own experiences with anything that they've been through. Perhaps if anyone's been through the GoGreen program experience. It'd be great to share that with others.
Yeah, I know that there are some hotels that have seen significant savings in a short period of time from going and working directly with our energy analyst. And I think until you have your building analyzed, you actually aren't sure whether or not you're operating efficiently or not. So I would encourage you to use the resource we're providing on your behalf. And then you know either confidently that you are operating very efficiently, or in fact there are areas of opportunities both for energy savings but also cost savings. So I'm thinking if we don't have any other questions, I'd like to thank you once again for joining us. We will be sending out the slide deck along with the recording in our follow-up communique. It will also rest on our website. We have all of our historic webinars with the slide deck and the soundtrack that goes with it. So if you missed our GoGreen webinar, you're welcome to watch that or share that potentially. If you're a general manager, share it with your maintenance team or vice versa. If you need to convince your owners, it's always a good way to educate, to be able to see what the overall program includes and then what the opportunities might be. So we thank you very much, and we acknowledge these are extremely difficult times. Everything we do currently is to ensure that our industry survives and that in the long run, we can potentially operate in a slightly different way that would give us an opportunity to not be as at risk if something like this was to occur again. And we all hope that that's not the case, but we are committed to preparing. We also have another series of partners that as we introduce them, we'll introduce them both in our communiques on our website, and we'll be developing a series of webinars also on recovery strategies and revenue management, so look for that. And you can reach us at any time. I'm ingrid.jarrett@bcha.com, and our website is www.bcha.com. Thank you again for joining us.